Thank you. 大家好. So we're very fortunate in today's world of air travel that air travel is not only reasonably affordable, but it's actually readily available, sending us to almost any destination across the planet in a matter of hours. For the cost of a single plane ticket, we can choose to transport ourselves not just from one city to another, but from a place of familiarity and belonging, a home, to somewhere that we maybe don't fully recognise, piquing our sense of curiosity, adventure, and often excitement of a new place and a new culture. And that's what travel's all about, right? And from looking around the room, I can see that not everyone is from China. I can see that many of you are possibly even here in Shanghai for the very first time. And for however long you plan to stay, you will no doubt be feeling a little bit more conscious of yourself as a foreigner here in China, and perhaps a little bit more conscious of the unique cultural differences that might challenge your thinking every day that you are here. Now, you can probably tell at a glance that clearly I'm not Chinese. I moved to Shanghai 10 years ago with my family and my business, and despite my intense efforts of studying Chinese, eating local food, conforming to local customs, making a lot of local friends, my status as the Laowai will remain forever unchanged. In China, I will always be seen as the outsider, an observer or minor participant in a complex and ancient culture, despite feeling incredibly comfortable living here, and I've received no invitation to leave yet. But during my life, I've come to learn that this gap or distance that sits between two cultures is not only a rich space for learning, but is the very thing that gives us agency for growth and self-improvement. In fact, the more you immerse yourself in the culture of others, the more you learn about your own cultural identity and sense of self. But traversing this space can really be quite a big challenge. During my life, I've been fortunate enough to live in 6 different countries, each with a distinctive culture. I was born in South Africa, and when I was 7 years old, our family moved to Australia. And then I studied there and finished my university, but actually I also advanced my studies in Sweden. And then I moved on and started my first professional job in Hong Kong. And then I spent a good part of 15 years living in England, and here I am now in China. And all of these places I have called home at one point or another, yet as far as my own true cultural identity goes, I actually don't really belong to any of these places. I grew up with Scottish parents who, despite being international travellers themselves, have raised me with their own cultural values and norms that stem from their own country and upbringing. This means I align better to their version of Scottish culture and to the country of Scotland, despite never having lived there for more than 2 weeks at a time. So to explore our cultural identity, first let's understand what the word culture really means. And I think if you really study culture and ask a lot of theorists, they're really going to tell you that it's actually quite complicated. And in fact, the word culture has come from a different meaning altogether, which is cultivating animals and food. But today we really accept a new meaning of culture, a whole way of life encompassing shared meanings and values, beliefs, practices, and institutions that shape human experience and behaviour. So we can thank Raymond Williams for that. Culture really provides us with the distinction between one type of social group and another. We can't have culture without people, right? And as humans, we are naturally drawn to cultural groups because we are socially tribal creatures. Not unlike my clans of my early Scottish ancestors, tribes are formed through shared beliefs, values, rituals, traditions, cultural practices, tartans, dances, whatever. Tribalism is not only a means of us surviving, actually it's in the inclusive communities that brings us our sense of belonging in the first place. And if we fast forward to today, we are no different in our tribal behaviours. In the things that we buy, and the brands that we engage with, and the people that we hang out with, We do these things because we have an innate need to be connected to others and to feel that sense of belonging in our chosen communities. This is really what we call a safe space, where we feel valued and respected. So what happens when we step outside of our safe space, like when we transport ourselves to a new cultural place? Well, when I was a young graphic design student studying at Swinburne University in Melbourne, I recall experiencing feelings of sheer excitement and anticipation in the lead up to my solo journey to Stockholm for an exchange student program. Not only was I entering a new creative learning environment at Konstfack Art School, I was also going to be embracing a whole new culture and language. And I couldn't wait. I loved everything I had read about Sweden. I'd even got the cassette tapes because it was the 90s and I started learning Swedish. And I was so looking forward to learning about the incredible design culture that existed at Konstfack. So in August 1994, I arrived physically in this wonderfully beautiful city, but emotionally I found myself in a very different place. My excitement had quickly turned to uncertainty and anxiety as I struggled to cope with the really simple tasks, like finding my way to the student accommodation, or buying simple foods at the supermarket, or coping with really basic communication skills. And bear in mind, this was at a time before we owned mobile phones, so I certainly didn't have any convenient translation apps or maps at my fingertips. But I was experiencing here is the early stages of what's commonly called culture shock. Theorists call it acculturative stress. And this is the really awkward process of social discomfort and anxiety whilst we adapt to a new cultural environment. Now, international students studying abroad will no doubt relate to the process of acculturation. And if we really zoom into that, it kind of looks a bit like this. We always start off with what's called the honeymoon stage, where we feel super excited and curious about the new culture, viewing it through our romanticised lens. We find ourselves wanting to try new foods, learn about new local customs, and compare how people live here versus back at home. And let's face it, many of our novel discoveries quickly find its way onto our Instagram feeds and our WeChat accounts in a desperate attempt to share every inch of this exciting experience. But as time goes on, some kind of crisis stage starts to emerge, or what I call the stage of great awkwardness and discomfort. And it's only here that we start to feel the real frustrating challenges that comes with assimilation. Student sojourners, more often than not, experience a wide range of difficulties that are common to other cross-cultural travellers, such as insufficient linguistic skills, or perhaps cultural mistakes and embarrassing moments that might occur, perhaps even are subjected to stereotypes or prejudices, and even possibly discrimination. And this can all result in some great discomfort, loneliness, homesickness, and possibly worse, even depression. So really, this is the make or break stage during that whole process of assimilation. Either you're going to stay or you're going to go. But with time and perseverance, what we can do is we can push through to what's called the adjustment or the reintegration stage. And this is really where we are starting to get control of daily tasks and begin to acclimatise and understand the new cultural environment and succeeding to navigate our complexities. And by now you've worked out the cultural rules of play and you've started to connect to locals and build a whole local network of friends, and gradually feeling more comfortable and competent with daily tasks. Like for me, learning Taobao when I first came to Shanghai was quite a big achievement. And there's, of course, a final stage, which is called mastery or acceptance stage, where we really acquire the higher level of cultural competence and acceptance, integrating aspects of the new culture into our own identity, but still retaining our own cultural heritage. A lot of my expat friends have actually married into Chinese families, and they've definitely reached a mastery stage. So only here do we really develop that sense of belonging and confidence in our ability to thrive in a new cultural context. But not all international travellers have the chance to reach a mastery stage of cultural assimilation. According to the recent market reports, over 1 million Chinese students travel to foreign countries every year to attend universities and colleges. And with such a large cohort of Chinese students entering a new environment, it's not uncommon to see social clusters forming of Chinese students sometimes days or weeks just after arrival. And despite the best intentions of Chinese students to embrace their new international culture, this ease of adjustment under the wing of their own tribe is a far easier path to take, bypassing any awkwardness or of the process of assimilation that may actually be presented. It's a way more comfortable to socially connect with people who are speaking your own language, who share similar values and even live in the same student quarters as you, sharing the same food. A survey that was completed at a university in Bath, England, found that a large group of international students were seen and often treated as a single homogeneous mass, rather than as individuals with unique needs. And although when questioned, a lot of the Chinese students, in fact, had hoped to integrate more, make more non-Chinese friends, and improve their English skills, yet they found it incredibly challenging to do so in that environment. So perhaps language is playing a big role here in creating distance between cultural groups of students and forming unwanted stereotypes. However, the decision to remain inside a safe space of one's own cultural tribe versus venturing out and learning about the other culture is ultimately down to the attitude and bravery of the students themselves. What's the big deal about whether we assimilate to a new culture anyway? What's wrong with just sticking to our tribe? Well, during each stage of acculturation, we're not only learning something new about the other culture, but we actually learn more about ourselves, especially when we feel exposed or vulnerable. Being outside of our comfort zone is the exact place where we recognise our glaring weaknesses, but almost by default, we confront those challenges with focus, courage, and determination in order to regain our control. And that is the magic. That is the moment. There is no going back because you've learned something and you've acquired this. So I'm going to tell you a brief story of when I first moved to Hong Kong. This is in the late 90s from Australia. I joined a company where I was the only foreigner amongst a large team of local Hong Kong Chinese designers. For a long time, I was actually ignored in the office, except for my bosses who were delegating work to me. And people were not intentionally trying to be unfriendly, but not all the staff were confident in speaking English. And they assumed that as a foreigner, I might not stick around long because foreigners seem to come and go in their eyes. So for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be the minority within another culture and how lonely that could actually feel when nobody came and spoke to you. This was actually quite a big challenge for me because I was keen to make new friends and learn about Hong Kong. That's why I moved there. And I really wanted to learn about the lifestyle of the people. It had a real buzz. So fortunately, after a week or so, I managed to make a significant breakthrough because of chicken feet, a well-known Hong Kong dish. What I noticed in the office is at 12 noon on the button, the team would down tools, desert their desks, join the queue at the lift and descend into the streets of Wan Chai below looking for a local restaurant for lunch. And my cultural note number one was, nobody eats alone in Hong Kong, they all go out in groups. So I decided to join that lift queue one day, and even though my normal lunchtime would have been 1 o'clock, I soon found myself around the table with my colleagues, chatting away as the dishes came out one by one. Now, I didn't recognise most of these dishes, and almost as a test, I think my colleagues were ordering something more and more peculiar each time. Actually, it's when I tried the chicken's feet, I actually quite liked the taste of the nice sweet sauce, and I quite enjoyed eating it. And at that very moment, I earned myself one badge of respect with the local people. So by simply showing interest, and for me respecting their culture, my colleagues warmed to me very quickly. And incidentally, one of the people sitting around that table is today my business partner here in Shanghai. So by leaning into the awkwardness of the moment, you never quite know which doors will be about to open. So in overcoming adversity, we strengthen our resilience, we definitely build our confidence to face new future challenges. And of course, in my case, I learnt a lot about the importance of empathy very early in my career, which is something I use pretty much every day in my work as a designer and strategist. So these are important traits to acquire during formative years as a student, and it sets in good stead for entering any chosen profession that you might choose. Each time you assimilate to a new culture, your sense of who you are is constantly being stretched and reshaped and expanded. So till eventually your territory of where you feel your sense of belonging could even transcend more than one country like my own. Now I don't even know where my home is, to be honest. So perhaps the students of today, all of you out there, will be better equipped to traverse different cultures than I was in the 1990s. Through globalisation and technological advances in the last 20-odd years, perhaps we encounter more and more familiar experiences in foreign cities that maybe brings us a little bit more comfort, or perhaps even disappointment. Is a coffee shop experience in Shanghai any different from a coffee shop experience in London? So in my work as a designer and brand strategist in China, local culture comes into almost every place branding project that we deliver, and we've noticed a very strong trend emerging in China in the last few years. Whilst Western commodities and Western style for a long time has been highly revered in China, now we're seeing a strong pivot towards global cultural resistance. It's almost like cultural revenge. Younger generations in particular are looking towards the uniqueness of their own Chinese culture to find their authentic cultural identity again in the face of globalised cultural homogenisation. I call this East meets East. This is the search for true identity and distinction between others, and is felt across all aspects of lifestyle in China, including travel. Now we have resorts in China that echo the quality and sophistication of Western resorts and counterparts, yet they have cultural characteristics that suit the way Chinese people like to travel. In this case, Chinese people like to travel in families and groups, and they like to host their friends, rather than go for an independent self-healing exercise. So only through understanding the cultural heritage of the Chinese social norms are we able to design something so unique for the local market. And uniqueness is what culture is really craving for. So in conclusion, my journey through a rich mixture of cultures, from Australian to Chinese to British, has not only armed me with the courage and skills to fuel my own personal development, but has provided me with the very content needed to perform well as a strategist and a designer in China. It's pretty much become my job. So my advice to you today is to embrace everything that is awkward and uncomfortable and even frustrating in your lifelong journey as travellers, and embrace that to grow yourself and become a more confident person. You will not only know yourself better, but you'll equip yourself with the essential tools to traverse any kind of terrain on your way to that unreachable apex. 非常感谢. Tack så mycket, and a big British cheers from me. Thank you.